Welcome! Kathy and I are on the road towards another adventure. Today we're going to talk about, in my opinion, one of the best TV shows to come out of Hollywood in the early 90s without actually coming out of Hollywood. It ended up lasting 6 seasons but started as an 8-show summer replacement for CBS. Now, many summer replacements were just that, a summer filler for full-time shows, and many would routinely disappear after one summer. The show was Northern Exposure.
He's a big city doctor
I'm not the Grizzly Adams type.
in the Alaskan wilds.
Too much hunting, Joe?
Just on the Lower East Side for bargains.
Northern Exposure premieres Thursday.
It was created by Joshua Brand and John Falsey, who created and had just wrapped up the extremely successful NBC series St. Elsewhere. The basic premise of Northern Exposure was a doctor moving to and working in Alaska. And like St. Elsewhere, it had a large ensemble cast. Network executives had visions of a St. Elsewhere type medical show, and they were willing to give it a shot, at least for 8 shows. I was a big fan of St. Elsewhere, but of course Northern Exposure wasn't even close, but I became hooked on the quirky 1-hour dramedy, as did millions of others. The series was to take place in the remote and small town of Sicily, Alaska, but in reality, it was the small town of Roslyn, Washington.
When I knew the show was going to be different was when Joshua Brand said, yeah, we're going to do the opening credits and we're going to have a moose walk through the opening credits. And he said, the network's freaking out and they just don't want us to do it, but we're going to have a moose walking through the opening credits.
Introducing Morty the Moose.
There's no animal trainer in the U.S. that has moose trained for working with TV.
Morty and his girlfriend Minnie, a nod to Walt Disney, lived at the Washington State University under a program studying nutrition and behavior.
The only way they could film that sequence was they had to fence in the entire town because you can't train a moose. So that was the only way they could film it. And then they just let it go and just picked off shots where they could.
The crew attempted to speed up the process with the always helpful, "Come here, boy." But more than likely, it was the bananas that they threw on the ground that kept Morty on the move. Morty did sire a calf, but passed away in 1994. Thankfully, we have Northern Exposure to keep Morty's legacy alive. Brand and Falsey briefly toyed with the idea of Southern Exposure, based in the Louisiana Bayou. But fortunately for everyone, those plans were scrapped. So Northern Exposure it would be, and Alaska the perfect location for their fish-out-of-water storyline. Now all they needed was the town. Logistically, they had to stay in the lower 48 to produce the show, and preferably find someplace in the Pacific Northwest, far enough away but also close enough to Hollywood. Introducing Roslyn, Washington.
Once we saw the town, and in the town, it's one main street, and there was that mural painted on the wall of the camel that said Roslyn. And I remember there, I just turned to him and I said, well, that's it. That's the whole story of the whole thing. And we said, great, this is going to work.
So Brand made Roslyn and her girlfriend Sicily characters in the show, and that's how Sicily, Alaska was born. The production was a mainstay both in town and the surrounding areas throughout the 6 seasons that it aired. And the entire cast and crew were based in Washington.
What a lovely little village.
Mother, please.
So the lovely little village of Roslyn now has an alter ego named Sicily. When the show first arrived in town, the population was about 860 people, and most were thrilled that Hollywood came a-callin'. But the thrill eventually wore off, as it seemed to seriously disrupt the once peaceful small-town vibe. The film crews would pop up unannounced, shutting down streets to businesses and neighborhoods for hours on end. Mayor Jack Denning got an earful from residents, even though he agreed he knew the show was important to the town. So he negotiated a truce. Moving forward, the show would have to pull a permit and give public notice of where, when, and how long they would impact the filming location. And they announced they would pay interested residents $50 apiece to be an extra, $25 to drive your vehicle through a scene, and they would pay a fee to businesses involved in the filming. So that seemed to calm the nerves until one certain spring day.
Sicilian tradizione, Joe.
That tradizione calls for all the men in town to usher in spring with a run in the buff. The film crew, of course, shot it in a sanitized fashion with everybody actually wearing spandex bottoms. But Rob, to be true to his art, wanted the last take to be real naked.
How are you going to get all these extras? We had like 100 extras. And I said, well, give me some money.
$15 additional did the trick. As they say, money talks and the spandex walks.
And we did just one take. I think we had a couple cameras running where everyone was naked, including me.
Everything was bouncing along just perfectly until there was a
"Don't look at the"
moment.
Just as the real mayor of the town comes walking out, and this guy looks and sees me in the front of this pack of men naked running through his town, and he truly wanted to arrest me. He really wanted to, and they had to kind of negotiate me not being arrested.
That was almost the end of Sicily as we knew it. It took lots of meetings and a coincidental gift of a fire truck to repair the relationship. And Roslyn would remain the home of Northern exposure until the end of the series. Now, Roslyn has a rich history as a coal mining town and much, much more. But we're concentrating on Roslyn's role as Sicily. Northern Exposure spent 40 to 50% of each episode filming in Roslyn. So where was the other 50%?
Marker.
First, they had a makeshift soundstage in a warehouse in Bellevue, but they eventually moved to Redmond, where they stayed for the duration of the series.
Joel?
Why are you so tentative?
In this rather unassuming industrial building once housed the headquarters of Northern Exposure, or Pipeline Productions. Everything from wood, welding, and paint shops to wardrobe, props, catering, safety, transportation, among others. Not to mention the 3 separate sound stages that were all housed in this building. Most all the interiors of the locations seen in Roslyn were reproduced right here. The brick was one of the first built. Obviously, it wasn't practical to shut down open businesses for hours on end. So the brick and Ruth Ann's store interiors kept that to a minimum. Although the K-Bear space and Joel's office were vacant and being leased by the show, they still had duplicates in Redmond. Before we leave for our nearly 90-mile trip back to Roslyn, let's take a moment and visualize a funny John Corbett story. As it became clear that the show was likely going to be canceled, there was a sudden run for souvenirs in the building. And John was the leader of the pack, but the holy grail of souvenirs was the moose head from Maurice's cabin set. John formulated a plan and went into action. After pilfering the moose head, he went out this back door. He couldn't go directly to his truck because the offices out front had windows. His plan was to tie a rope around the horns and gently lower it over this chain link fence and into the cemetery behind the building, and then simply drive around and pick it up. It didn't quite go as envisioned.
This moose head's heavy and it's awkward, and I got the rope, I'm gonna try to grab the rope. I throw the moose head, the horn catches, and of course the moose head just goes boom, falls down on the ground, and one horn breaks off. Right? Me.
But how do we send it back?
So I throw that horn over.
Yeah, fine. I just leave it.
Finally, I get the thing up there. Over the moose head goes, and the rope goes through my hands. Bang, the other horn breaks off. And an ear breaks off. So I got this broken moose head now. All broken within literally 3 minutes. I've destroyed this moose head.
No worries. All's well that ends well. The moose is safe and sound in John's living room.
Case closed.
All right, let's get back on track. As we head back to Roslyn, we're going to make one quick stop at a location which was frequently used by Northern Exposure. And about 10 years earlier, it was used by one of my favorite movies, Rattlesnake Lake Recreation Area. For fans of the show, you might recognize it as one of the locations where Chris Stevens' trailer was parked, and the location of the Thule Fling. And always remember, it's not the thing you fling, it's the fling itself. Again, it was used in many episodes. And if you have a keen eye, you can pick out the mountain formations and Rattlesnake Ledge. The movie I mentioned was Continental Divide, a 1981 romantic comedy starring John Belushi and Blair Brown. It was produced by Steven Spielberg. Although the movie identifies it as Victor, Wyoming, the last few minutes of the movie took place at the railroad depot at Cedar Falls, which was on the south side of Rattlesnake Lake. The ending shot pans to reveal the lake and Rattlesnake Ledge.
This is going to be one terrific marriage.
Already. I love it.
I love us both.
Now, the really neat part of this story is that the depot seen in the movie, which has a tremendous history, was due to be torn down, but it was saved by a Washington man who bought it, moved it some 20 miles away, and made it into his residence. You know, they should make a movie about that. Several episodes were shot in Seattle, hauling supposedly in New York and Maryland to the big city of Seattle. Yes, a long trip from Sicily, but just a few miles from Redmond. Joel and Maggie flew to Juneau for a doctor's conference, but all the interiors were actually filmed here at the Edgewater Hotel in Seattle. All right, onward to Roslyn. During our very scenic drive down I-90, I'm reminded of the first episode, when Joel took his trip to Sicily by bus. It could have easily passed for Alaska, but in reality, the shots took place here in Snoqualmie Pass. This, of course, is the same route the cast and crew made at least once a week. And in the winter, the drive could be treacherous. And oftentimes, if you were lucky enough to get through going up, it didn't mean you were going to get through coming back. Speaking of snow, on that rare occasion Roslyn just wasn't socked in with the white stuff, here came the Northern Exposure crew with a convoy full of dump trucks full of it. They would line the downtown streets, and locals just shook their head. And of course, there was the time that they simulated snow falling by using the old Hollywood trick of instant potato flakes. It looked great and the shots were perfect, only to discover they stopped up the entire town sewer system.
Still rising.
Oh well, no one ever said Sicily was perfect. And by the way, it wasn't all negative. The show stepped up and plowed the streets when it was needed. We've arrived in Roslyn, 35 AC, after Sicily. The show debuted on Thursday, July 12th, 1990. That's right, 35 years ago. So with that in mind, let's take a look around the area and see how some of the Northern Exposure landmarks fared. No fan of the show would possibly miss the opportunity to visit the Roslyn Cafe and its famous mural. Sadly, just this year the cafe has closed for good and is up for sale. But hopefully the mural will live on. And of course the brick is the brick. It was built in 1889 with 45,000 bricks, hence the name. Of course most of us know it as just Hollings Bar and Grill. But interesting enough, it was built in a rough mining town, and it came included with a jail cell in the basement. Thankfully, Officer Zamansky never realized it.
Just a few more questions. And then I'll kill you.
But it was actually featured in a 1979 Dick Van Dyke movie, The Runner Stumbles. So the brick has been around, and it's full of surprises. There was another brick building built in 1889, and it was right across the street. The Northwestern Improvement Company building, and the home of the voice of the last frontier, K-Bear Radio. But more importantly, it's the last remaining structure from the Roslyn coalfield. It originally acted as the company store and is on the National Registry. So quite appropriately, it is now the home to the Roslyn Miners Memorial. The building was purchased by the Roslyn Downtown Association, who vowed to keep the tribute to K-Bear and Northern Exposure in place. Many of the downtown buildings on Pennsylvania Avenue were built in the late 1800s to early 1900s, including Roslyn Grocery, also known as Ruth Ann's General Store and Library. It's still here and open for business. Well, we've made it to Dr. Fleischman's office.
Dr. Kolach from Juneau on line 1.
We only have one line. I'm sorry, where were we? Oh yes, the building. It was a vacant tool shop at the time Northern Exposure rolled into town. The show leased the building for the duration of the series. Now it's the Sicily gift shop. Anything and everything Northern Exposure. They say Maryland's original desk and chair are right here. The desk proudly and appropriately displaying Northern Exposure treasures. It really is a fantastic place to visit. We won't spend a lot of time on the private homes in town that mainly acted as exterior shots, but we will visit a couple of important ones. Here's Maggie's second home after her mother burnt down the first one. Still looks the same, including that nice front yard, which you might remember was dug up in an episode where Maggie uncovers ancient Indian artifacts. And before long, Maurice was on the case. Which takes us to Tranquility Base, Maurice's humble abode. This is actually the second home used after the initial season. It still looks fantastic and has that Maurice feel. Let's visit Minifield Field, where on a snowy day in Sicily, Chris ponders his college-by-mail thesis by using the poem Casey at the Bat while playing baseball with his professors. It was filmed here at Pioneer Park, which looks exactly the same 35 years later. This lot was empty 35 years ago, and it's still empty, but it played a key role in the production of Northern Exposure. The entire caravan from Redmond would roll into this space at least once a week. The Sicily Church. Actually, several church exteriors were used during the series. Here's the Immaculate Conception Church, which might look familiar. It was also the church used in the Dick Van Dyke movie that I mentioned earlier, The Runner Stumbles. Probably the church that most people remember, and Chris preached those wacky sermons in. It was the smaller church, and sadly it no longer exists, at least where it once stood. The good news is it was bought and moved to this location. Although it's not yet restored, it's still here, and that's a blessing. Incidentally, there was an interior set for the church in Redmond. When you talk about history, the Roslyn City Cemetery tells the story. Northern Exposure shot several segments at this special place. Before we leave Roslyn and explore some outer locations, I wanted to take just a moment to recognize a longtime Roslynite and character in Northern Exposure, who just recently passed away. Jerry Morris. He was born in Cle Elum and eventually moved down the road to Roslyn. In 1980, he opened a one-chair barbershop right here behind the brick. He served on the Cle Elum School Board and was a member of the Roslyn Volunteer Fire Department most of his adult life. But one of the highlights of his life was his experiences with Northern Exposure. As he would tell the story, on a lazy afternoon he was napping between customers in his barber chair. In walked two gentlemen with clipboards and asked him to essentially join Northern Exposure as Ed the Barber. He said, yeah, why not? That decision resulted in him appearing in that role 5 times. And another 50 times as an extra. One of his fondest memories was working with the late Diane Delano, Sergeant Szymanski. The scene called for him to jaywalk in front of her, and the director said, just go with it. So he yelled action, and Jerry did his thing. Szymanski immediately stopped him and wrote him a ticket. Jerry wings it and grabs the ticket out of her hand. Szymanski orders him, get down and give me 20. As Jerry described it, he dropped his 300-pound body to the ground and managed 4 pretty good ones. She yells, I said 20. He managed a few more before collapsing to the ground. She burst out laughing, and the 1,000-plus tourists lining the street behind the camera started applauding. She grabbed his hand, helped him up, and they both took a professional stage bow. That's what it's all about. And in essence, the spirit of Sicily. Jerry was later presented with an Emmy certificate from an episode in which he played Earl the Barber. He kept it proudly displayed in his barbershop until he retired. So now let's take a short trip up to Jerry's birthplace and another vital town for Northern Exposure. The show not only filmed in and around Cle Elum, but took advantage of the resources both in people and services of the larger town. In the early days of the show, when the cast and crew worked 6 days a week, 16 or more hours a day, they would stay here at the Timber Lodge Inn, which you can see is still in business today. And while making this video, we also stayed here in town at a fantastic bed and breakfast. Joel's cabin as well as Mike's dome were both constructed on the private property which is now the Circle 8 Ranch in Cle Elum. The property had several good-sized ponds, and the show would oftentimes shoot there when they needed a shoreline or a glimpse of water. One example was the crane dance with Ed and Chris. As the show's popularity grew, so did the crowds, and they found that shooting on private property was a nice break to the sometimes chaotic on-location shooting. Many say one of the main stars of the show was the scenery, and it was because of places like Cle Elum River and Lake. One or the other or both were used in many episodes. Cle Elum Lake actually appeared in the beginning. It was the end of episode 1, and the town gathered along the shores of the lake for the 9th annual Wonderland Festival, whatever that was. That's where Maurice and Halling made up, Chris and Shelley made their first appearance in the series, and Dr. Joel resigned to the fact that he's probably going to spend some time in Sicily, and he shared a moose burger with his new pal Ed. And there were many memorable episodes along the river, like when Ed and One Who Waits listens to the water. We saved a special location for our last visit, probably one of the most memorable scenes over the show's entire run. It involved Ed's birthday present to Ruth Ann. After opening all of her presents, Ed presented her with a jar of dirt. He explained that it was from a plot of land he bought for her grave. Although she was a little frazzled by the stark reminder of her eventual demise, she accompanied Ed to the beautiful site that he picked, and she thanked Ed for his thoughtful gift and the unique chance to dance on her own grave. She and Ed proceeded with a celebration of life dance and a touching scene to be remembered. It's believed that after Peg's death, her daughter traveled here and spread her ashes. Peg loved flowers, and Kathy and I thought it would only be appropriate to leave some wildflower seeds here in Peg's memory. The show was magical in a way, and I guess you could say it was produced in a simpler time. But 35 years later, it's been resurrected, and it's resonating with a brand new audience. So I guess it could be said, Northern Exposure isn't just a TV program, it's a state of mind.
It's all in our hands, this life of time that's given to us all. It gathers round each night, each morn. We watch it pass and grow. It is all in our hands, it is all in our hands. With every